Joe McNamara is trapped on a plane with no transponder, no tracker, and no way home, and special ops. Lioness Season 3 Episode 5 is about to decide if she ever makes it back. This is everything we know, and everything we're predicting before the Idiot Army drops this Sunday. 5 days. That's how long Joe McNamara has been gone. 5 days of water torture, 5 days of psychological warfare, and 5 days of her own team missing her by minutes, not hours. Season 3 of Special Ops. Lioness has spent its first 4 episodes slowly tightening a noose, and by the end of Episode 4, Murder Hornets, that noose had turned into something far worse. A private jet in the sky, transponders switched off, carrying America's most valuable CIA officer straight toward enemy territory. If you're caught up, you already know how brutal that episode was. If you're not, here's the short version, and trust me, you need it before we get into what's coming. Joe is taken from her own neighborhood in Fairfax, Virginia, months after Russian operatives came knocking on her front door. That home invasion set off a chain reaction that's been building ever since, and Murder Hornets finally let it explode. The episode split itself across 2 timelines: the present, where Joe's Russian captors are moving her from a safe house to an airplane hangar in Baltimore, stripping away her tracker piece by piece, and the past, 6 months earlier, where we learn exactly how Joe provoked this entire disaster in the first place. That operation had a name: Operation Treasure. And it's the reason Russian intelligence was willing to risk grabbing a senior CIA officer off American soil in broad daylight. Here's the part that should worry every Lioness fan heading into Episode 5. Joe's team got close. Painfully close. Using intelligence pulled from a captured Ukrainian double agent named Alexandra, along with a tail number forced out of a Russian operative during a violent confrontation, Kyle McManus and the rest of the unit tracked their way to that Baltimore hangar. They arrived to find blood on the floor and nothing else. Joe, sharp enough even under torture to think 3 steps ahead, had deliberately cut herself to leave a trail behind, betting that her team would come looking. They did. They were 10 minutes too late. By the time boots hit the ground, the jet carrying her was already airborne, and Amber Whalen, the officer working communications and tracking, couldn't get a fix on it. No transponder. No flight plan. No way to know if that plane was headed toward Cuba, toward Venezuela, or somewhere far worse. That uncertainty is the entire engine driving Episode 5. Because here's what makes this situation different from every other crisis Joe has survived in 3 seasons of this show. This isn't just about finding her. It's about what happens to the United States if they don't. Joe doesn't just know a few classified details. She knows the identity of nearly every Lioness case officer, every safe house, every active operation the program has run over the past decade. If Russia gets her home and starts extracting that information, or worse, hands her off to a third party like Iran, the fallout wouldn't stay contained to one missing officer. It would become a full-blown intelligence catastrophe with consequences reaching across the Middle East and straight back into Washington. And that's exactly the kind of pressure Caitlin Mead was preparing Joe's husband, Neil, for by the end of Murder Hornets. In one of the season's most quietly devastating scenes, Caitlin sits down with Neil and lays out 3 brutally honest outcomes. Either the team finds Joe quickly, or the search drags on for months. Or, and this is the possibility she forces him to sit with, Joe doesn't come home at all. That's not the kind of thing a CIA handler says to spouse unless the odds have genuinely turned that grim. It's a gut punch of a scene, and it sets up exactly the kind of desperation Episode 5 needs to pay off. So now we know the title. Episode 5 is officially called The Idiot Army, and it premieres this Sunday, August 30th, exclusively on Paramount+. The early photos Paramount has released tell us a lot about where this episode is headed, and it's not just Joe's story anymore. One image puts Joe, Caitlin, Byron Westfield, and Secretary of State Edwin Mullins in the same room together, which is a serious signal. When 4 characters at that level of authority are photographed together, it usually means the crisis has stopped being a field problem and has become a full-blown national security emergency, the kind that pulls in the State Department and possibly the White House itself. Morgan Freeman's Mullins hasn't had to step directly into the middle of a live operation like this before in Season 3, so his presence in that room tells us the political stakes are about to spike hard. The second batch of photos pulls us back down to ground level, back to the operators who actually have to execute whatever plan comes out of that room. Grady, played by Ian Bohen, Alex, played by Sandy Todorovich, and Tucker, played by LaMonica Garrett, are shown together, suggesting the tactical side of the Lioness team is being mobilized for something big. And Kyle McManus, played by Thad Luckenbill, is back in frame too, which matters, because Kyle is the one operator this season who has already proven he'll break protocol if it means getting Joe home. He executed a Russian operative in cold blood during the failed hangar rescue, and while Caitlin quietly told him not to do it in front of the team again, she never actually told him to stop. That's a loaded gun sitting on the table heading into episode 5, and it feels like exactly the kind of detail that pays off in an episode with this much urgency behind it. Let's talk about that title for a second, because the Idiot Army is not a throwaway name, and this show has already proven it picks titles that mean something. Murder Hornets wasn't just a cool phrase, it was literally the codename the team gave their own counter-operation. So if Lioness is being consistent with itself, the Idiot Army is likely either a phrase spoken by a character in a moment of frustration, sarcasm, or fury, or it's a pointed jab at how badly this rescue effort has gone so far. 2 failed attempts to reach Joe, a Russian jet slipping out of American airspace, and an internal team that's already fractured over Kyle's actions in the field. Idiot Army could easily be someone's blunt assessment of how this entire operation has been run. It might come from Byron venting at Langley. It might come from Joe herself, watching her captors outmaneuver the very people trained to save her. Either way, expect that phrase to land with real weight once the episode actually airs. Now, based on everything we know from the episode 4 fallout and the photos and promo materials released for episode 5, here's what a reasonable breakdown of the episode's likely structure looks like. Nothing here is confirmed dialogue or confirmed plot beats. This is analysis built from the trajectory of the story and the official preview material, not a leaked script. Treat it as informed prediction, not gospel. The most pressing question is what happens to that jet. By the end of episode 4, the aircraft carrying Joe was already in the air with its transponder disabled, and the CIA was left racing against a shrinking window before it crossed into airspace, where an American rescue becomes politically and logistically impossible. If the plane is still reachable when episode 5 opens, expect the tactical side of the story, Grady, Alex, Tucker, and likely Kyle, to be thrown into some version of a high-risk intercept operation. The photos showing those 3 operators together strongly suggest they're being pulled into an active mission rather than sitting back at base, and given how personal this has become for the team, it wouldn't be surprising if this operation pushes well past standard protocol. Joe herself remains the wild card, and honestly, the most compelling part of this whole storyline. She's spent 4 episodes proving she doesn't break under pressure. She's baited Russian interrogators, deliberately injured herself to leave a trail, and kept her composure through psychological torture designed to wear her down. If she's still in transit or freshly landed when episode 5 begins, don't expect her to sit passively and wait for rescue. Everything about her character so far points toward her working an angle from the inside, gathering whatever scraps of information she can about her captors, their destination, or their intentions, and looking for any opening to tilt the situation back in her favor, even slightly. That's who Joe McNamara has always been on this show, and there's no indication season 3 is planning to change that now. Then there's the political layer, which the episode 5 photos make impossible to ignore. Seeing Joe, Caitlin, Byron, and Secretary Mullins together suggests this episode spends real time in rooms where decisions get made far above the level of a tactical strike team. Episode 4 already planted the seed that Russia might not keep Joe for themselves. There was open discussion of the possibility that she could be handed off to Iran, turning a bilateral crisis into something involving multiple hostile actors at once. If that threat carries into episode 5, expect Mullins to be navigating an incredibly delicate situation, one where any aggressive move to recover Joe risks a diplomatic explosion, but doing nothing risks losing an officer who holds a decade of sensitive intelligence in her head. That's the kind of impossible choice that tends to define the back half of a Sheridan-written season, and it lines up with everything the marketing for this episode is hinting at. On the home front, Neil remains the emotional core the show keeps returning to, and for good reason. Caitlyn's conversation with him at the end of episode 4 was deliberately brutal. She didn't sugarcoat the odds. She gave him 3 honest outcomes and told him to prepare for the worst, so relief would feel like a reward rather than an expectation. That's not comforting, and it's not meant to be. Going into episode 5, expect Neil's storyline to sit in that uncomfortable space between hope and preparation for loss, especially with his daughters old enough to sense that something is deeply wrong. The show has used Neil's perspective all season to ground the espionage chaos in something painfully human, and there's no reason to think that stops now, right when the stakes are at their highest point of the season so far. There's also the matter of Kyle McManus, and what happens to someone who's already crossed a line once. Caitlyn's warning to him wasn't really a warning against violence, it was a warning against getting caught doing it in front of witnesses. That's an important distinction, and it tells you everything about how far the show is willing to let this rescue effort spiral. If the team gets another shot at intercepting Joe's captors in episode 5, don't be shocked if Kyle is right back in the middle of it, and don't be shocked if the rules of engagement bend even further than they already have. Bobby's discomfort with what he did in Murder Hornets hasn't gone away either, and that internal tension inside the team, professional duty versus personal loyalty to Joe, feels like exactly the kind of conflict this episode is set up to explore.